Ladies and gentlemen, pay attention. This is your boy, the coach from the WWE. I would like to welcome you to the very first wrestling podcast in the world to take you on a weekly deep dive into classic matches along with legends of the squared circle. Enjoy the discussion. Enjoy the back and forth. There's so much to get into. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Payoff.
Welcome to an all-new episode of The Payoff. I'm Tom. That's Jeff. Jeff, we're talking ECW. We're talking Kissimmee, Florida. Is that how you say it? Kissimmee?
Yeah, you're good.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Kissimmee, Florida. Yeah, you're good.
I used to love that ECW would run these like super random places that you never had heard of. If like, even like they didn't run Pittsburgh, they ran this little town called Rostraver. That's where they had like November to Remember. So they would always find these like random ass places that had these, 4,000 seat dumpy buildings because they were cheap to run probably and would allow whatever shit ECW did to take place inside them. Oh yeah, go ahead and light tables on fire and barbed wire and whatever else. So I always got a kick out of it. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So tell me about this match. Did it just hit our radar because we were interviewing Shane and we just wanted?
Yeah, of course. And so we're gonna be joined, and you're gonna do a great interview here and conversation with Shane Douglas. And so this is one we kind of had in the pocket for a little while here. So it was one that I wanted to make sure that we covered, and just something different. We haven't done an ECW match in a while, and so check it out. That's all. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to covering this one. So I say we get right into the build.
Oh, it's time for the build.
All right, so guilty as charged, 1999. We're kind of on the tail end of ECW. This was a little later on in the promotion. I mean, it's you have a lot of different characters in here. I mean, it's crazy with how many guys were in ECW before they got on pay-per-view, and then were in it when they were on pay-per-view, but went to WCW or WWE. And then you had this I think of it almost like a third act or a fourth act of ECW where, he had to come up with new stars, and he did. Like, was this my favorite? Was it my favorite version? No. But was it a really good version? Yes, it was. So, yeah, I'm pumped to talk about this. So January 10th, 1999, Kissimmee, Florida, at the Millennium Theater. Did you look something up about the Millennium Theater?
I'm actually literally trying to do that right now, and I'm working on it. I've got it pulled up, and it doesn't look like it's still there. It also looks like it was like a community theater. Like when it says theater, you need to adjust your thinking of what this place looks like. Like, it is very small. Yep.
Well, now I'm
pulling up Street View. Like that's how. Well, it's currently, the address is a hotel, so it may not even be there anymore. So I'll keep digging here. I see there might be a video over here too of this place, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a theater. Like, you'd have like the picture that I have up is an act of Wizard of Oz. So it was like a play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see it when we're watching this one. Yeah. So I'm talking to him, but okay. All right.
Yeah. Looks like it's still there.
Is it? See, I'm not seeing it as being there still.
Now, I'm curious.
All
right.
Okay.
We're gonna find out more about this place. So it looks to me like it's. Yeah. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's gone. All right. So on this show, we start out with Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney defeating the FBI and Danny Doring and Roadkill in a three-way dance. I remember some of these matches, right? Like they were fun. Okay. Tajiri is going to defeat Super Crazy in 11 minutes. Like, what are the odds that match wasn't freaking awesome, right? Then, and I don't know if this was his debut or not, probably not, but remember Sid did some like random run-ins during this era. This was one of them where he wrestled. They did a 1 minute match against Cronus and beat him. But dude, the place went nuts for everyone loved him. I mean, Madison Square Garden loved him. Like people just love Sid. He's one of those guys where it would have really been nice if he was able to give a Hall of Fame speech. It's kind of, I know you can't put everyone in the Hall of Fame every year, but it kind of sucks when some of these guys don't get their opportunity, Like that it probably would have meant a lot to him and it would have been a really good Hall of Fame speech. That's a shame.
Yep.
Dudley Boys are going to defeat New Jack and Spike Dudley in 10 minutes. RVD is going to keep his ECW TV title in 18 minutes against Lance Storm. That was probably an awesome match. Just Incredible is going to defeat Tommy Dreamer in a Stairway to Hell match in 18 minutes. I for whatever reason, I remember this show. I don't know if I rewatched it in the last few years or had it on in the background or whatever. I just remember all these matches being really good. And this was Just Incredible's first like big chance. And I'm like, man, he's good. And then our main event, Taz, Shane Douglas, ECW World Heavyweight title match. What can you tell us about the build to this match?
Yeah, so this is one, again, it's kind of interesting. You had Shane Douglas, who's coming in as the ECW World Heavyweight Champion, as a heel, just arrogant, disrespectful. This was the Triple Threat faction as well, too. He had a long title reign, and so coming in that one. Taz, on the flip side, hard-hitting, intense, like the submission expert here. And so him kind of positioning himself as the no-nonsense person who would challenge kind of Douglas's being an asshole is really what it boiled down to. So leading up to this match, you had Douglas like kind of making fun of Taz on promos, calling him a submission wrestler who couldn't measure up as a true champ. But then Taz being a fighting champ and vowing to dethrone the self-proclaimed franchise as we all know him. So, but it had been brewing for a couple months at this point. You had tag matches, you had backstage angles, kind of highlighting both guys. And so it was really kind of billed as you had Douglas's heel showmanship and Taz being the hard-hitting wrestler. So it just made sense from that perspective. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to debriefing following our conversation with Shane. Shane, he's one of the nicest guys in wrestling. It's funny. I've been to a lot of these conventions over the years, and there's like two ends of the spectrum. There's the ones that couldn't give a shit less. They're there because it's an easy $3,000, $10,000, $50,000, whatever it is. Okay, and couldn't care less. A recent example of that is Ronda Rousey. I mean, she looked pissed off and had no interest in interacting with fans at WrestleCon. Okay, there's that end of the spectrum. Opposite end of the spectrum is Shane Douglas, Sandman, RVD. Funny, I'm naming all the ECW guys, but those are just three that come to mind that couldn't be nicer, will talk to you, bullshit with you, look you in the eye, genuinely care. Like, so Shane's just one of the good guys out there. And so it was fun talking to him, and just a great guy. So, all right, we are, this match was guilty as charged. Now I will tell you, I don't know where this match is because as of the end of December, we're no longer on Peacock. So as we're recording some of these, we don't know exactly where they are, but everything's on YouTube. That's the good news. So go find it on YouTube, and hopefully at some point soon, not by the time of us recording this, but hopefully sometime soon, a lot of these things find a landing spot. It looks like they may do separate channels for ECW, WCW, WWE, WWE Vault, all the Undertaker, right? All these different channels on YouTube. That seems to be the approach. So anyways, all right, Jeff, let's send them over to the payoff.
Oh, it's time for the payoff.
All right, this is the payoff, and we are here with the franchise, Shane Douglas, you and Taz. Shane, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be back, man. Having a lot of fun watching these old matches. These great. You know, you don't want to sound like you're patting yourself on the back, but you go back and look at it, it makes you really proud to see the legacy that you left.
Well, it's funny, you know, going through your career, you had a lot of really interesting matches and moments. I mean, we haven't even talked about any of your stuff in WCW. You had some fantastic matches there. Just some awesome stuff in ECW. So I'm really excited to talk about this match. What was Taz like as an opponent?
You know, everybody knows Taz, right? You know, temperamental. That temperament, though, was based out of professionalism. You know, he wouldn't accept half-assed, and I love that about him. And when you see, you know, you can see the obvious size difference, the height difference between us. But Taz was so explosive, and you can see he's built like a fire hydrant, right? You know, he's short, those thick, powerful legs, those hips, and that's what made him the human suplex machine. Because no matter what he would do, even if you didn't go with him, he had such strength down below. And because he already has the low center of gravity, any suplex he would throw, you know, he could throw Bam Bam, and did throw Bam Bam how many times? You know, and anytime you work with somebody that had that kind of explosiveness. And the other thing about Taz that a lot of people may not realize, Taz was an extraordinary chain wrestler. You know, he had an extensive amateur background. And, you know, when, you know, we would go at it at times and really have, you know, 10, 15-minute, you know, chainings that, you know, there weren't many people I could do that with. That was a bygone era of wrestling that, you know, was starting to dissipate at this point. And, you know, the fact that we were able to throw some of that back in, you know, there's a language that wrestlers have in the ring, not a spoken language, it's a language, a physical language. And it's astounding to me today how many of the kids in the business are completely, we're inside cradle, you know, just really adept. And again, for a big mouth heel, that's so easy to play off of. You know, everybody knows how lethal Taz was, right? The thing I was got a real kick out of was after he went to WWF and he had that great match with
Kurt Angle in the
Kurt
Garden.
Angle. Yes, an incredible match. And right after that, he was made an announcer, and that didn't make sense to me. And when I talked to Pete later, he said, well, because Vince said that he was having a tough time believing it because of the size. And, you know, you can go back and watch the tapes. There were how many times that you look here, see the center, perfect execution, perfect. That, you know, that me, Bam Bam, and Chris and Francine, all four of us backed down from Taz. Not one person in that building said, come on, there's four of you. You know, everybody believed that Taz was a killer. And it was part of the way that he played it, small part of the way that we sold off of it. But not one time did anybody in ECW ever say, come on, you're 6 inches taller than him. Come on, there's four of you. Everybody believed Taz. Taz was one of the most believable characters, I think, in wrestling history. So how comical that the guy that people used to call the genius couldn't see it because, well, he's not 9 feet tall. Ridiculous.
Agreed. Well, and look, your personal preference might be for certain size people, but
yeah,
if the fans buy it in general, that's what matters. And go and watch that tape of him in the Garden that night, and that makes it pretty clear.
No, it says it all. And the one thing about Taz that I give him a lot of credit for, you know, with the, his temperament again is what, you know, people so often talk about. What I always found was a guy that was extraordinarily professional, willing to work, willing to learn. For instance, earlier the night, you know, we can get into it in a second here. There was a lot of politics that were going on behind the stage with this. I was owed a lot of money from ECW, a lot of money. And, you know, when Paul said that he had this idea for me dropping the belt, that, well, as soon as we did that, you know, as soon as I lose that belt, you know, I've got no leverage to get that money back. And, you know, so there was a lot of stuff going on that Taz, we had talked about it since, thought was because I didn't want to do a job to him. It had nothing to do with that. I mean, God, I had Gilliam McGillicuddy pinned me before. You know, so once we talked about it, you know, the air was cleared. And, you know, I'd said to him about on his false finishes. Taz would always, up to this point, when you did a falsie on him, he would at 1.5, 2 seconds, he would start to kick out with his legs.
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's almost never that you see somebody, a wrestler, try to kick out of a match or kick out of a pinfall that they don't kick out of it. And so as soon as you start to move, the fans subliminally know you're going to kick out. And it kills the finish. It kills the falsie. We talked, I had a separate dressing room this night because I didn't want to be around anybody else. I was pretty pissed off with Paul. And Taz and I sat and talked, and I explained to him, I said, when we do falsies, don't move an eyelash until 2 9/10. And I physically showed it to him, like on the wall, using the wall as the mat. I said, at 1, 2, that's where you pull the shoulder. Move nothing before that. And he didn't say, don't talk down to me. I know how to do a false finish. He sat and listened and then later executed. One of the things I want to talk about here was like the battling in the audience. When I went to WWF in '95, Pat Patterson and Vince McMahon at every television taping, Jim Ross, would always ask me a ton of questions. Well, why the fighting in the audience, and why the tables, and why the chairs? And they just didn't get any of it. And, all you have to do is look at the audience. The audience is eating it up. Well, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words and a video's worth 100,000. So if you're sitting at home in Pittsburgh and you're watching the ECW tape at 2 a.m. on the WB network, and you see me and Taz right here fighting in the audience, look at all those people around. They can tell that we're not stomping our foot and pulling our punches. They can feel the sweat coming off of us as each of us hits each other. They can hear and feel the smacks and the hits. That's why the audience is reacting like that. And by doing that, you sitting at home get the feel that, hey, this is something different. These guys ain't just stomping their foot and, reading off a teleprompter. And there's something about that in the ingredients. When you're making a recipe, there's something about it that you have to have certain ingredients to make it work. I would argue that today's WWE and Ring of Honor and TNA lack all of this. It has a feel of contrivance. When you see somebody at the WWE do a promo, you can tell they're reading a script. My 13-year-old son said to me recently, watching a Raw episode, I won't say who was on screen, but there were 2 people on screen, and my son kept giggling to himself. Now, he's got a pretty good head on his shoulders. He knows he comes up with great finishes and, will tell you what was wrong with the match. And thank God he has no desire to be in wrestling. But as we were watching this Raw tape, he kept giggling to himself. And I finally, after about 30 minutes, said, okay, what's so funny? You've been chuckling to yourself all night. And this is what my 13-year-old said to me. He said, Dad, I feel like I'm watching a middle school play.
Wow.
And I couldn't have said it better. I wouldn't think that he'd watch this match and tell me that he thinks he's watching a middle school play. Charlie Brzezzi, another little thing I talk about here. Charlie Brzezzi was our handheld guy. Ron Buffon was our stationary camera, and Charlie was our handheld. And that poor guy would have to work his ass off because with that big camera on his shoulder, he'd have to lug it around all through the building and follows this stuff. But it gave such a sense of urgency. You feel like you're there when you're watching this footage.
Yeah.
The WWE is their production is incredible, right? I mean, second to nobody. But when you watch it,
well, this shot right here is a perfect example.
Yes. Yeah, it almost looks like there's a fan with a phone recording it, and it's got such. Again, I hate to use the word, but it's so apropos, organic. There's nothing contrived about this. You don't feel like we sat in the back and talked about this spot and this is going to happen and that's going to happen, and it's going to be busted open again. But the energy in that crowd was again. It's a common theme to the ECW events. The crowds were always insane, and the energy. I hope the fans understand. For us as performers, you could be, in the third day of the worst flu you've ever had, haven't slept for 3 days, be exhausted, and go out into that crowd and you feel like somebody's plugged into a 220 outlet. You hear people say that performers, feed off the energy of the crowd. Boy, no truer words were ever spoken. There's Big Ronnie, Atlas Security. They are the best security team in the business.
Still to this day.
With all this chaos going on, how hard would it be for one of these fans to pull out a knife and stick one of us, or take a swing at one of us, or whatever? Those guys always kept us safe, and they kept the fans safe with all this crazy melee going on around the building.
So you had been champion for 406 days at this point. Did you know that you were leaving? What was going on at this time?
Well, again, because of Paul, the whole TAZ angle with me was emanated out of TAZ. ECW would reimburse our expenses. But in lieu of that, when he would reimburse you, you'd have to give him the receipts so that he could write the receipts off. And Taz wanted to keep, and got into a real big fuss with Paul about it. He wanted the reimbursement and to keep the receipt, double dipping, so to speak.
Sure.
And Paul was really ticked off about it. And he tried to explain it to him and tried to, reason with him. And, Taz wasn't budging. And, Paul was really pissed off. And I remember the night that he came up with the idea and he said, Taz's first job will be to you. And, so for a year leading into this angle, over a year, into this ultimate battle finally, that was supposed to break, and you could see it didn't even budge. Felt like I was being thrown on concrete. But so for the whole year, I'm backpedaling, running from Taz. He beats me in under 3 minutes for the TV title, and it was always the backpedaling. Now I go out and get beat by him after doing that for a year. My heat is dead. I can't say, yeah, but. There is no but. You've backpedaled for a year. He's beaten you in under 3 minutes, and now he's beaten you for the world title. There is no next chapter. And the fact that I was owed so much money, wrestlers are born with a paranoia because they get screwed and lied to so often that, to me, the writing was on the wall. I go out and drop this belt, and there's no leverage to get that money back. And I almost didn't come to the show that night. Paul had called me earlier that week, and I spent the whole week calling Paul back, and he never answered, never returned the call. The 2 nights before this event, I called him at about 10 o'clock that night, and I said, I'm giving you to 11 o'clock, and at 11:01, I'm walking out the door and going to the bar and getting drunk, and I will not be at the event. And I left and went to the bar, and about midnight, he called. And I answered and said, what are you doing? And I hung up on him. And this went on 5, 6, 7 times. Rather than punch him in his face, hanging up on Paul pissed him off more than anything. And I was pretty ticked off at this point. I'm the world champion. I don't care that you owe me money. You want the belt changed. That means you have to cooperate with me to some degree. And that's not that's not a big head or anything, but especially when you owe me at this point about $77,000, $77,000. And a lot of that money was money that I had spent out of my pocket. So it's not incumbent on me to keep coming to you and kissing your feet. It's for you to come to me and talk to me professionally. And when he called me early that week, he said, I got an idea. And then didn't call me back the whole week. And so when I finally answered the phone and talked to him, he talked to me from about midnight to about 7 a.m. till it was daylight out. And, told me he would sign an IOU, a promissory note, that he wasn't screwing me out of the money, and on and on and on. When I pulled up to the building, something just didn't, like my body, I couldn't physically get my body out of the car and walk in there. I knew I was getting screwed. And so I sat there for the longest time. I don't believe Bam Bam was here that night. I think Bam Bam he might have left by now. But Chris and Tammy came over by the car. Balls and Axel, different guys were coming, getting out of their car and seeing me sit there. They'd come over and talk for minutes and go in the building. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And finally, after about an hour, I said, fuck it. I put the car in drive and I drove away. And I drove to, like an Applebee's or a Fridays or something. And I was sitting there having a beer. And I called Bam Bam and, told him what was going on. And, gave him the whole rundown. And he said, well, if you don't show up, he said, really what you're going to be doing is fucking the fans. And that really resonated in my head. That, I never, ever wanted to disappoint or fuck the ECW fans because they've been so good to us. And that was what ultimately took me back to the building. When I walked into the building, there was a guy standing there. I think it was Stephen Prazak. And, if I'm remembering correctly. And I went to turn left. He said, everybody's dressing down here. I said, I don't care. He said, well, nobody's allowed to dress over there. And I pushed him out of the way just because he said that. And I went to the other side of the building. And Francine had come over, and I told her I didn't want to talk to her and sent her away. And a few minutes later, there was another knock at the door, and I thought it was Franny back again. I said, Fran, I told you I don't want you over here. And I hear Terry Funk say, well, goddamn, Shane, I just want to talk to you. So, out of respect, I obviously opened the door for him. And, we started talking, and he's, pretty much told me the same thing Bam Bam did. So that sealed it in my head that we were going to have the match. And then Taz came over, and Taz asked me directly. He said, again, perfect execution. I didn't hit the side of the table. My legs didn't hit the table. I hit square on the table. Perfect execution. But, Taz came over, and to clear the air, the first thing he said to me, he goes, hey man, do you have a problem doing a job to me? And I said, Taz, if that was the issue, I wouldn't even be here. And now when you watch closely here, when Sabu runs in, his turban catches fire. And you'll see him swat at his head here in a second. Again, we didn't have the professional pyro that, see,
oh my God,
his head was on fire. He's doing the Michael Jackson. And the thing about Sabu that was just amazing was he was so damned explosive, and everybody in that building knew what he was capable of doing. So just entering him into that match, just took everything. It took a great match to an even greater level. I mean, it just elevated it.
He was so much fun to watch. Tell me a little bit about this three-way dance that you had with him and Funk. You guys went an hour. How did that happen?
Well, Paul at that point was right before that. I had done a 45-minute Broadway with Funk, and then we did the three-way dance. I had never been in a three-way dance, and I don't think Sabu had ever been. He may have been in Japan, but I had never been, and I'm not sure he was. And, at this stage of this match, you can feel that everything's hitting on all cylinders. Everything is working. And so it just sort of drops into itself, and the success breeds success. The three-way dance with me and Funk and Sabu, it never felt like it hit its stride. And I remember that night, if you remember, I was the only guy that went the full 60 minutes. Me and Sabu started. Funk had been worked hurt before that. And so Sabu and I started. I hurt Sabu 12, 13 minutes in. He left and took a 15-minute break. And then Funk came out and did the Spirit of 76. And the match never felt like it got in a groove. It just felt really choppy. It was like, we did this, and now we'll do this, and now we'll do this. It just never felt like it hit a stride. And I rolled over towards the camera after the match. Sharon Martel was my manager at the time, my valet. And I rolled over. I was blown sky high. It was, again, a hot building. That building was always hot. And she rolled over and said, oh, my God, do you fucking see this? And I picked my head up, and I looked, and the fans were giving us a standing ovation. And I thought they were just being nice because they had gotten to Broadway. And I later went back and watched the match. I would get the tape sent to me like that week. And I watched the match afterwards, and it wasn't until I watched it that time that I saw the specialness of that match. There was something unique about it, something that had just a different feel. And it was so perfect for ECW because the American fans had never seen anything like that. And, you know, give credit where credit's due. Terry Funk was the element that made that all work. You know, Sabu and I were feeding off of Terry, and you know, give all the credit to that three-way dance to Terry Funk, because he kept the whole thing going. You know, when he was doing, and here comes Tammy and Chris. You know, this is another part of another element of the whole night that didn't feel right to me. You know, the triple threat had been such an integral part of ECW, that heel stable. Every great company always had a great heel stable. And, you know, suddenly, you know, I'm losing the belt. It's clear Paul's breaking up the triple threat. Bam Bam was gone by this time. And it just, none of it felt right.
Yeah, it could have been a little bit more dramatic than it was.
Oh, yeah. Now, at the end here, there's something I'll point out to you now, and you can watch as it happens. I had told Taz had a habit of, when he would win, he would climb the ropes and hold his hands up. I knew that because of the length of my tenure as champion, and the fans would know that it was a changing of the guard, so to speak, that he shouldn't gloat. You know, he should be more humble. And after he gets the win here, I don't tap. I pass out. And I'm laying there, and I hear the fans going, "Fuck you, fuck you." And I open my eyes, and the fans are flipping the bird. I'm thinking, boy, I really misjudged that. You know, he was right, I was wrong. Until I rolled over and saw that he had climbed the ropes. And I screamed at him to get down, and he did. You know, it was the only thing that he really did wrong. But the match, you know, again, I haven't watched this match in years. But boy, especially by today's standards, this is a phenomenal match.
Well, and the comment. Well, I was watching it earlier. The commentary is fantastic too. At the end, Joey was just unbelievable because he was explaining the whole story and what was happening and how, you know, you had been abandoned by everyone. I mean, it was a really good story. Joey
gets so little credit from the industry. You know, he was the only person I'd ever seen do solo commentary. Didn't have for most of it, except when I was hurt. Didn't have a color guy to play off of, and yet he would so eloquently tell those stories, the nuances that the fans need to understand. In my book, Joey Styles is definitely top three. See, here he goes, climbs the rope. And if you watch the fans, you'll see them start to flip him the finger. And that's when I yelled at him to get down, because I knew the fans wouldn't, you know, they would take that as him rubbing salt in the wound. But, you know, he was, you know, in our business, I think a lot of times fans, you know, are so eager to say, you know, this was a great match because of this guy or that guy, or because of the writers or whatever. ECW, in my head, all of those successful matches were based off of equal partners. You know, it takes two to tango, right? And to me, I always tell whoever I'm working with, two heads are better than one. So don't expect me to call the whole thing. I'll call the bulk of it. But, you know, by all means, if something pops in your head, call it. If it ain't right, I'll cut it off. But in every one of these matches that we're doing in these episodes, you know, Bam Bam obviously would bring impact and input. Taz would do that. After all, who knows his character better than Taz? Sabu would do that. Terry Funk would do that. Raven would do that. Dreamer would do that. And so it always made such seamless matches. And Joey, the one thing about Joey Styles that I've never seen any other announcer do, either before or since then, is Joey would come down, like, for instance, the Kata Hajime, Taz's finishing hold. he came down and was asking Taz. He had a bunch of different names. First of all, he asked Taz if he had a name for it, and Taz didn't. And Joey said, "Well, I've got a couple ideas," and started to say, "Well, how about this, and how about this, and how about that?" And Karahaja was one that he came up with. And Joey would often do it. He would come down and say, "Hey, do you want me? Is there anything in the match you want me to really point out? Is there any nuance that I should get across to the audience?" And there's 15 matches on ECW cards. I typically would not go to the room before midnight, and sometimes well after that. And Joey would go up there in that booth by himself, nobody to play off with, no notes, and he would just seamlessly call that action and elevate it. So as good as a match as that was with me and Taz, like you said, the commentary, I'm sure, ramps it up 2 or 3 notches.
Yeah.
And it's when wrestling is done properly, it's a team effort. It takes everybody providing their best and giving their best. And I think that's what you often saw in ECW. The sad thing to it is I'm watching these matches and seeing how where the industry has gone. What a damn shame, that ECW didn't get a Bob Carter or a Tony Khan to come in and put money behind it, because this kind of wrestling today, I think, would explosively sell. And there's also things I don't think we could do today. Like when we would do the women getting bumped. I think the one time I belly to belly to Beulah, Francine got pile driver by Tommy Dreamer. I don't think you could do that today in the post 9/11 era. And I think that's a big part of what, to me anyway, at least in my taste, it just turns me off when I watch WWE. That everybody knows my feelings on the teleprompter crap. The way they set their matches up, they just go out and regurgitate. They don't really ever get into the feel. And to me, the biggest thing is that the kids don't know their characters. So if you ask me, what kind of beer does the franchise drink? Troy Martin and the franchise are 2 very different characters. If you ask me what kind of beer the franchise would drink, how would he vote in the next presidential election? I can answer those questions. What kind of women would he go after? I can answer those questions because I've voiced that character out. I know the franchise probably better than I know myself. But if you would ask a kid in the WWE what kind of beer their character would drink, I think their response would be, what would the writers say? What does the script say? They don't know their own characters.
Well, because there is no character. Your son could watch WWE Raw for the next 12 months, and if you said, tell me about Seth Rollins, who is he? Well, right. He has long hair and he's fighting this guy, and there's nothing. Right. Explain who Taz is, explain who the Sandman is, explain who the franchise is, and those were characters,
right? And they weren't cartoon characters. It wasn't like, okay, here's Shane Douglas coming down and he's an evil professor, or here's Taz, he's a maniacal, hard ass, whatever. Everybody knows people in the world like those characters. Everybody knows a Sandman. Everybody knows a Taz. Everybody knows a Shane Douglas, a Terry Funk, a Tommy Dreamer. Everybody has friends like that. They know people like that. And so, that was what I think was what Paul's brilliance was in his writing, was that he didn't encumber us with cartoon characters to go out there and portray, which would have been so easy to do because that was the industry norm at that time. But it was also why then at that time, much like today, the WWE's ratings falling, 8,000 buys to their last pay-per-view. Those are TNA type numbers. And, if they don't see the writing on the wall, and I think obviously he must, his recent announcement that Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff, the one thing that's going to be very interesting to see is I know for a fact that Bischoff and Heyman both despise each other. So I think that's part of the reason that they're on opposite shows. Bischoff being put in charge of SmackDown makes sense because of, one thing Eric is phenomenal at is, he's, if you read anything about the old WCW, he had a lot of interaction with Turner executives. And, that's where Eric is most comfortable, is, talking to those type of people and speaking their language. I never saw Eric as a very creative guy. Paul is the flip side. Paul's very creative, couldn't talk to an executive to save his life. So it's going to be interesting to see how those two play off of each other, if there's any kind of relationship between the two shows. But it's going to be interesting because like with Paul's not a very patient guy. He'll give you a direction and it'll be, at least the way he used to be, it would be scant in like I said, the only direction you ever gave me in the franchise was you're the captain of the football team that steals over his girlfriend and screws them. And that was the only direction he ever gave me. He saw that gave me something to sink my teeth into and let me run with it. He allowed me to create that character so that I understood the character. He didn't have to explain to me each week, this is why your character would drink this kind of beer or go after this kind of woman. These kids today, because they don't understand their own character, you can see that bleed through. Like, what separates, say, Finn Balor from Seth Rollins?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, they both do the same kind of moves. They both undersell everything and undersell oftentimes things that they shouldn't, and oversell other things that they shouldn't sell that heavily. I saw a match one time with Seth Rollins, and this isn't to bury him, it's just to point out what we're talking about. I had worked extensively with Samoa Joe when he came to TNA as head of talent relations. I'm a fan of Joe's. I think Joe has a very unique character, and he's very good at just about everything. He can do the high spots. He can do the chain mat wrestling. He's got a very TAZ-ish, different, but very much in that same vein character as Taz. And so he has this match. I was paid to watch a pay-per-view with fans up in New Hampshire, maybe, or Connecticut. I think it was New Hampshire. And the first match on the pay-per-view, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, the first match on the pay-per-view was Seth Rollins versus Samoa Joe. And the vignette rolls, the one thing about Vince's shows, as much as I can't stand the bastard, his vignettes are phenomenal. They tell the story, they set everything up. Should make it easy. And in this vignette, the announcer says, Seth Rollins had these 2 serious knee injuries and knee reconstructions. So it remains to be seen. Will Seth Rollins with a damaged knee, will the classic ground and pound guy, Samoa Joe, go for Seth Rollins' knee? Well, of course he's going to go for the knee, and you know that going in. And he does. And for 10 minutes, he's working. He's got Seth down. At one point, he had Seth like in a modified single leg crab with his leg over his neck. It was phenomenal. And at about 12, 13 minutes into the match, after that leg that's had 2 major knee reconstructions and been worked on now for 10, 12 minutes, Joe goes for a clothesline. Seth ducks it, runs to the ropes, jumps on the rope, does a moonsault, beautiful, in the air, over top of Joe, lands, and then runs for 2 minutes, knocking Joe down. At which point, Joe finally clotheslines him, and he takes a bump, and what's he do? Grabs his knee. He's just run and did that moonsault for 2.5, 3 minutes. At that point, I literally stood up and I said, I'm fucking out. Look, I'm sure he's a good guy. Obviously a very athletic guy. I'm sure he didn't want to go out there and just blow the entire match. They don't know. They don't know better. They've all come up working with each other. And so what could you learn from working with a guy that's the same level you are? All you can do is learn what you've learned. You're just going to go out and do what you do. In my case, when I coming in, first of all, I trained with Dominic DeNucci and Bruno Sammartino would often stop by. When I get my break on the road, I go to UWF. So I've got Bill Watts learning from. I'm working on a nightly basis with guys like Eddie Gilbert, Pez Watley, Dick Slater, Dick Murdoch. I mean, it was a veritable who's who. And then from there, I go to the NWA, Dusty Rhodes, and working with Magnum. And then the Continental, back with Eddie Gilbert and working with guys like Randy Colley and Sika. Then back to the NWA when it turned to WCW was Ricky Steamboat, who taught me to be a main eventer. And then when I went to ECW and became a heel, didn't know the first thing about being a heel, but got angled with Terry Funk. So at every key point in my career, I was taught by the best of what they did. And so when it came time for me to play this franchise character, I had 11 years of experience of working with all those guys. Shame on me if I wouldn't have been able to portray that character. That's what I was bred to do. And so today, you know, when you have WWE and you look at all the kids that are all relatively at the same level, being written drivel by guys and women that have no idea about, who've never had boots on in their life, or been in a match, and telling these kids to read off teleprompters. To be honest with you, I'm astounded that they've been able to perform to the level they have. You know, because nobody's really giving them direction. It's just, you know, you've heard Moxley's interviews recently about, you know, how many times he would go to Vince and say, you know, why are we doing this? It doesn't make sense. Why? It's what I want you to do. And if it doesn't make sense to him, he can't sink his teeth into it and make sense of it himself.
Correct.
Because he doesn't, you know, and so from the very beginning, you've already cut him off at the knees. And for the life of me, I can't explain. I'm just you know, commentating. I can't explain why Vince does that, because to me, it's the worst way that you could approach. And when I hear Tony Khan saying he's going to be a booker, I'm sure he's a brilliant guy, vastly successful. But a guy like me hearing him saying he's going to be the booker, you know, as if that's just some frivolous job that anybody can do. Well, how would he feel if I called him up and said, make me the head coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars? I mean, after all, I've played football and I've watched football all my life. How hard can it be? You just tell if you and I are wrestling, you go over tonight or I'm over tonight and do this or do that. How hard can it be? Well, we're seeing now with the precipitous drop of WWE's ratings and buy rates and everything, house show attendance, 3,000 people at the last pay-per-view, 8,000 buys. You know, AEW has a unique opportunity that hasn't presented itself in almost 30 years for somebody to come in and legitimately beat WWE at their own game. But if they do, like the old saying goes, you only get one chance to introduce yourself. Mm-hmm. If they go out and they introduce themselves as being spot monkeys, they'll be dead in the water. If they introduce themselves as WWE 2 or Junior or Light, they'll be dead in the water. Their one asset they have going into this, they have a guy with money. Yep. It's imperative that they give the fans some feeling, not saying they're going to be like ECW, but something in the vein of these feelings of these matches. If they can't do that, and I'm questionable if they can, then I believe that we're going to see another Dixie Carter. We're going to see somebody dump half $1 billion into something and have nothing to show for it.
Do you think what was missing with Heyman? Was it that he needed a business manager? Yeah. Did he need more money? What was it?
Well, both. I mean, you know, the one problem that Paul had, and I give him credit for, was ECW, especially by the time like 97 rolled around. We had a lot of big names in there, a lot of guys making very good paychecks, you know, for as little as we were working. And, you know, that he was able to keep it afloat for 7 years is the amazing thing. But you could give Paul, you know, a checkbook with $10 and tell him to keep it balanced. He couldn't do it. That's just quantum physics to Paul. And unfortunately, you know, while ECW was rolling and doing really well, people like me and Mark LaMonaco and Tommy Dreamer and TAZ was running the school and creating designs for T-shirts. Tommy was running the warehouse, the fulfillment center. Me and Bubba were both promoting. So Joey was doing stuff, you know, because he was involved in corporate America. So we were all doing things off on the side. Unfortunately, none of us knew until it was far too late that ECW was that deep in trouble. And at that point, there was no saving it unless somebody like a Tony Khan or a Bob Carter came in. And, you know, Paul was, in all respects, aloof. the day of a show, I would ask him what he wanted. And this was early on when I was doing the franchise character. I would keep going to him, and he would walk in and not have a match set. You know, he'd just be sitting looking around the dressing room going, okay, well, I'll put Sabu and TAZ together, and I'll put the Sandman with, and he just do it on the fly. And amazing that he came up with that level of creativity, and he also had a lot of input from those characters, Raven, had so much input on his character. Terry Funk obviously did. I did. Sandman did. Raven, TAZ did. Tommy Dreamer did. Funk clearly did. So it wasn't like Paul had created every piece of everything you were seeing. He was coming up with the general genesis of idea and then handing it off to a very professional dressing room that was executing it. Paul, I honestly don't believe Paul could balance a checkbook to save his life. And, you can't come in and say, okay, well, the company's making $100,000 a week and give $150,000 a week out and pay. It just doesn't work. I mean, you can do it if you want to try to juggle balls for a while, but in not too distant future, you're going to have a problem. And that's what Paul was doing. He was giving out paychecks that he had to do to keep the guys there, but the company wasn't clearing that kind of money yet in order to justify those paychecks. And, so the company quickly got into financial trouble, at which point he started taking money infusions, started with his parents when he maxed them out. And Todd Gordon had already been maxed out. Again, didn't know it till much later. He was taking money from Vince McMahon. And when I was off doing the color commentary, Joey and I were sitting there one day in the studio waiting for them to finish up the tape so we could do the voiceover. And the phone rang, and Paul reached up and hit the speaker button and said, "Paul Heyman." And I hear Vince say, "Paul." And Paul about broke his back trying to get up there to get that phone off the hook to stop me from hearing it. And he grabbed the cordless and walked out of the room. And I looked at Ron and Charlie, who were working on the production, and Joey, and I said, "What the fuck is that piece of shit calling our studio for?" And nobody would say anything. And when Paul came in, I said the same thing to him. I said, "What's that piece of shit calling here for?" And he said, "Oh, he needed input. He needed advice on an angle." I said, "Vince McMahon needed advice on an angle, and he called you." And I knew, but I didn't. And I said to him, I don't know what's going on between you two, but I said, I'll tell you this. That piece of shit will when he needs to, he'll throw you under the bus and he'll stab you in the back. As long as you're aware of that, then you keep doing whatever it is you're doing. And, by that time, ECW was dead. We just hadn't hit the floor yet. And he needed to that's why he needed to get rid of me and get rid of all the guys that he could to get out of that dressing room, because he owed all of us money. And when you look at the end there in ECW, and this is nothing against Rhino or Simon Dominic, this is all great performers, but you could see that Paul had clearly blown his load in the earlier incarnation of ECW, because at that point, if you remember, Simon Diamond is wearing black and gold, like the franchise, doing cerebral type promos like the franchise. He had for a while Rhino standing in the corner with his arms folded, like TAZ, built like TAZ. So it just seemed like a whole lot of regurgitation of stuff. And, that wasn't going to work in ECW. You had to reinvent the wheel. And sometimes you can only capture lightning in a bottle once.
Well, and if that roster had been kept intact and there was some sound business management going on and cash flow would have been managed properly and licensing and all that stuff, I mean, the company would have, who knows if it would still be around, but it would have had a much longer run. I mean, ran out of money, ran out of talent. So I want to leave with one final question. I want to ask you, we've watched some fantastic matches of yours. I've done a lot of research on your career. Some of the stuff I knew, some of it was new to me and fascinating. How do you want to be remembered by fans?
As somebody who passionately loves the business, considers myself blessed to have had the run that I've had, and the people to work with that I did. I want, in one sentence, I want the people to come to believe that Shane Douglas was a great professional wrestler. I was a fan of the business. I still am. I love professional wrestling. I can watch it. I can watch great wrestling 24 hours a day. Matches like this, I can watch all day. I can go back and watch Savage matches, Steamboat matches, Flair matches, Harley Race matches. I can watch this all day long. I just passionately love wrestling. I firmly believe that there, especially with the amount of money that wrestling has made, and right now Vince is sitting with $5 billion in television contracts, that there is no reason in the world that those wrestlers there aren't being, all of them, from the top of the roster to the bottom, being taken care of, being treated as commodities to the company, because they are. Did I tell you the story at StarCast? Did I tell you the story about Ivan Koloff?
No.
Okay, this will sum up everything that I think is wrong with the business on a professional level, or lack of that. Ivan Koloff was a sweet human being. The first time I met him in 83, 4, like in that time range. And we were doing a TV taping in Philadelphia. Well, I lived in Pittsburgh, obviously, and so I just drove out and planned on driving back after the show. When I left the building, the Spectrum, I saw Ivan sort of milling around in the back area, looking around. And I said, "You need to ride someplace, Ivan?" And he said, yeah, you going by the airport? I said, "I am. I'll take you." So I I had a Ford Explorer at the time. So we got in there, and that was the first time I ever spoke to him. And as we pulled into his hotel, he said, "Where are you staying tonight?" I said, "I live in Pittsburgh." I said, "I'm driving." He said, "You driving home tonight?" I said, "Yeah." I was 20-something years old. And now he had run those roads, because back then, the old WWF, that's all they did was work and drove. And so he was familiar, and it was a pretty long drive, 5-6 hour drive. And he said, "You don't have a room, do you?" I said, No, but I'll be fine." He goes, No, you're staying with me. So he let me stay in his room with him. The next morning, he bought me breakfast. And I loved him ever since. Started calling him Uncle Ivan. Most of the people in the business did, because he was such a nice guy. Now, I've heard stories when he was younger. He was a hell of a hell raiser, a big drinker and a hell of a hell raiser. But, he was always, at some point, later in his adult life, he became a devout Christian. And, it always, God bless you and that kind of thing. And I saw him about 6-7 months before he died. Chris and I had gone to a show in North Carolina, and we walked in. I wrestled C.W. Anderson that night. And he and his wife were sitting at the merchandise table. I walked over and gave him a hug and said hello. And he said, "Shane, you used to be a teacher, right?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he reached into his suit. He had a suit jacket on. He reached into the pocket and he pulled out an envelope. And he said, "Will you do me a favor and read this and tell me what you think?" So I opened it up, and it was a letter that he had written to Vince, thanking him and his father for all the opportunities, how much he enjoyed working for them. In the second paragraph, he requests to be considered, and this is the way he wrote it: "I request to be considered for a Legends contract." And as soon as I saw that, I went, "Whoa, Uncle Ivan." I said, "Trust me, I'd seen Vader's." And it was obviously intentionally written to be confusing. Like you had said earlier, most of these guys were not educated guys. And legalese can be hard for even educated guys to follow. And I sat there for like 2 hours reading Vader's and diagramming it. And it says all through the contract, you retain your intellectual property. But even though it says it multiple times, if you diagram it out, because it keeps on saying, refer to Schedule C, go to Table 6 and go back to, Chapter 1 and all that kind of shit. In the end of it, if you diagram it out, they get to keep your intellectual property, meaning your name, your face, your likeness, and in other words, your body of work. And when I saw that, I said, "Uncle Ivan, I've seen one of these trusts. He goes, "No, Shane." He goes, "I know exactly what it is." And what he told me was what he had written at the bottom of that paragraph. Ivan had broken his ankle so many times over the years because he had the slip-on boots, no support, that both ankles had sort of rolled under and were fused. And so he was hobbling on the outsides of his feet. And it was heartbreaking to watch. It was inhumane. And he says that he wants to be considered for a Legends contract. And he states the reason why. He said, I'd like to be able to walk down the beach with my wife one time, not in pain, before I die. He then thanks Vince and God blesses him. And he signed it. And I said, well, Uncle Ivan, if you know what the Legends contracts are and you're okay with that, I said, then just on the letter itself, I'd give it an A+. He said, well, thank you. And I appreciate that. I'm glad thank you for doing that, Shane. And I went to walk away, and he's putting it away, and he goes like this with his finger. Like, hold on a second. So I stop, and he reaches in the other side, and he pulls out another envelope. And on this one, I can see the WWE logo. I said, Uncle Ivan, that's your personal business, bro. That's none of my business. He goes, no, I'd like you to read it. So reluctantly, I open this envelope, and I pull out the letter. It wasn't even professionally addressed. His real name was Aurel Paris. It didn't say Mr. Aurel Paris, 123 Main Street. It said Ivan. The whole letter was this long. It said, Ivan, I don't know why you're writing me this letter. This has nothing to do with my business. After all, I don't run a fucking welfare business. It's Ivan Koloff. Now, we all know the work of the business, but I can tell you this, having known Bruno pretty well, there is no way in the world, regardless of what Vince Sr. or Jr. wanted, that he would have laid down and let Ivan Koloff beat him if he didn't believe Ivan could carry that belt. So the very fact that he beat Bruno tells me that he must have been a hell of a hand. To insinuate to a guy like that with his pride, we're all men, we all have pride, that you're begging for welfare. When you're giving these Legends contracts out, it's going to fuck them anyway. You get $10,000 up front. You don't make another dime till he makes the $10,000 back. Then you make 5% of the net. But you owe them a 27% administrative fee for selling the item, and you pay the shipping and handling. So take a $10 DVD, you're going to get 50 cents off that. Probably a little bit less that because it's the net. But you're going to owe them $2.70 for selling it, and then you're going to pay $3, $4, $5 to ship it. So you're never making another dime. It's a 5-year contract that can roll over in perpetuity, and they can renew it just by saying they're going to renew it for another 5 years without giving you another $10,000. It's a garbage thing. It's literally one step up from slavery. And but keeping in mind that Vince had put Scott Hall, and I think he should do this, but he put him through rehab 23 times at $55,000 a pop, $1.3 million, and won't give this poor schlep $10,000. And let's be honest, to a guy like Vince, $10,000 is like the change you and I have in our pocket. And then to write him a letter and suggesting that he's begging for welfare for that, it's astounding. It really is astounding. And then the guy dies 6-7 months later, having never gotten his ankles fixed and never got to do that one walk down the beach with his wife. I don't know if somebody like Vince sleeps at night. I really don't. And that would haunt me. But that's our business. And I think that you said about what the fans remember, that I was somebody that, to my own detriment, because it hasn't been good for my career, but spoke in my mind that I firmly, in my heart and in my bones, believe that these guys and women should all be treated professionally and be treated equitably. These guys, all of us, we go out and we don't complain about it. We miss our kids' first steps, their first words, their first days of school, their graduations. Steve Williams missed his dad's funeral because he had to defend the belt that night. I think that kind of commitment warrants you being treated professionally. And yet, for some reason, our business doesn't see it that way. And for every guy like me, I'm certainly not the first. Bruno tried it. Many others have over the years. But for every guy like us that tries to do that, you've got 25 guys like Shawn Michaels that will stab you in the back just to get close to Vince. And so the guys are their own worst enemy, even when you're trying to do what's right. Like, for instance, Hogan. Hogan was the only person in the modern era that had the capacity to say, you know what, Vince, make us all employees or I'm not going to the ring. And at WrestleMania, what Vince going to close the show and say Hulk Hogan doesn't wrestle? Saturday night main event, same thing. And he didn't do it. Now, he didn't do it because he was making a boatload of money while the other guys were making a blue-collar wage. But what would a Hulk Hogan have made I think at that time, his biggest year pay-wise was $6 million. He made like another $14 million on endorsements. What would Hulk Hogan have made in a company that was grossing over $1 billion more than the NFL and the NHL combined, had he done that? But these guys, they're all bred to believe I got to take care of me and fuck everybody else. And so they screw themselves in the long run. And, I fear that even though we're hearing different things out of AEW, that it will ultimately go back to what the paradigm in the industry is. Because those guys are basically making $1 million a year, right? Hey, life is great. What happens, so you make $1 million a year, you go out and you buy the big house, bunch of cars and motorcycles and boats. Now next year, the company folds, you get hurt, your run comes to an end, whatever. Do you just tell the bank to come take the house and the boat and the cars? These guys don't think that far down the road, and it's a shame. I've heard that Tony Khan is saying he's going to be different, and I hope he is. I pray for the guy's sake that he is, because one thing about wrestlers, like all those matches we just watched, and so many that I've watched of the guys that I've mentioned, when wrestling is done well, it astounds me how eloquent it is. When you see two guys going out and creating basically live action theater at the same time they're beating the shit out of each other, and doing it on a night to night basis, never missing their cues, never missing their spots. It astounds me because, just by watching, you'd think, hell, these guys must be getting hurt every night. And today they are, I guess. Back then, injuries were rare. It was like a magic trick that these guys, all of us, were going out and doing such physical stuff and going out and having a beer afterwards, and making a lot of money for people. That's the biggest part. And, so to insinuate to Ivan, and if he did to Ivan, I'm sure he'd do to anybody else, that you're begging for welfare because you want treated equitably. You're not saying, hey, Vince, you made $1 million on my name this year. I want $2 million. But if he makes $1 million on your name, shouldn't you get 1,000 of that, 10,000 of it, something? To date, he's never paid me a dime. I still get paid for the Royal Rumble from 90, 91, whatever it was. Not much, but you still make residuals on it. He's never paid me a dime or any of the ECW people a dime off of our ECW work. And like I said, I don't know how the guy sleeps at night.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate you sharing all this. I mean, you gave some really good information. And I think it's good for people to hear different perspectives and to hear some of this stuff. And I really think it's helpful. So, well, this has been awesome. This was great watching this match. It was great talking about a whole bunch of different topics. We sincerely appreciate you being on the show. It was a pleasure.
Appreciate it, man. I had a great time. Like I said, I hadn't watched those matches in years, and to get a look-see back at them, I'm proud, like I said, of what we did in those matches. And I hope that, 20, 30 years from now, somebody watches and goes, holy shit, these guys were great. It's just to be remembered. I think it would be the coolest part of it. And hopefully we've done that.
Absolutely. So I'd like to do it again sometime. So let's try and set it up. I've got more matches, more questions. So
yeah, sounds great, man. Hey, this is a lot easier to me than getting hit with chairs. So, and again, I just to get a chance to go back and look at those and relive them, because honestly, I've never shown my kids these matches, because my oldest son just turned 18. My youngest son is 13. They're probably at the ages now where they could, but I had never shown them to them previously because it was, a lot more of an adult product. So it's been years since I've watched this stuff, and I enjoyed going back and watching it. It's, as time goes on, you have a tendency to start to forget some of the stuff, not forget like the all the stories to them, but it just sort of fades into the back of your brain someplace. Yeah. And to get a chance to watch it, man, I knew there were good matches, but watching it just reaffirms that to you that, man, we did create something special there.
Yeah.
Ho! It's time for the aftermath.
All right, Shane and Taz, what'd you think?
Really good stuff. Like, you know, just to kind of see it, like this is one of those, you know, hot crowd, just great match. You know, kind of, I went back and watched it separately from you. So when you were doing, you know, you do the interview or did the interview with Shane on that one. And so just really good. Like this is one of those, like, to kind of go back and watch ECW, like, you know, you're going to find some enjoyment in this one. Yeah.
The thing that I like about these is, you know, the realism. Like it felt different. There's just something about it. It just, the grittiness of it. And there's really nothing to compare it to because, you know, even like a AEW, okay, that's doing kind of some hardcore stuff, blood, all these things. It's still highly produced network television, fancy crowds. You know, it's not the grittiness of these shows. That's what I love about it. It was just that like happy mix of, it's not too indie bullshit, like sloppy high school gymnasium, but it wasn't so polished that you lose some of the grittiness. I can't think of anything else that's ever struck that balance like ECW did.
Yep, absolutely. It just really good. And so, so this one, again, in the aftermath, what we get into, like we saw Taz beating Shane Douglas at this show to win the ECW World Heavyweight Championship. Really just a big kind of milestone for him, making him a top star. The loss ended Shane Douglas's reign, kind of bumped him down a little bit with Triple Threat, but still key heels, still part of those storylines, all that other stuff. It really helped elevate Taz, though, to that main event status. And because how physical this was, reminded people, like you said, it's real. Like they are out there and they are beating the crap out of each other. And then on the flip side, with Taz and kind of reinforcing that, you had Douglas continue to appear in ECW, but this was really the shift. So like we're getting away from Shane and into more Taz. So it's so interesting at this point. So PWI, we finally, after a couple of weeks, have some ratings and rankings on this one. And so Shane Douglas was 98 in 1999. Taz was 10, so way up there on the list. Good to see. The Observer Newsletter, this one, 60% thumbs up, 17% thumbs down, 20% in the middle. So it kind of says Taz beat Shane Douglas to win the ECW title in 22-15. It says Douglas's face looks way too eerie, like Brian Pillman did. You can see the deal about the 35-year-old man who thought he'd been held back for years but was going to get the brass ring, and his body started falling apart. Styles did a great setup to build the intensity in the match, and so just good stuff overall. What are you thinking on this one?
7.5 for me. I have biases just like everyone else. I don't pretend to be objective. I just rank them how I see them. And this one's 7.5. I really liked it, man. How about you?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I was thinking of 7 from the start. And so just a really good match. Just Shane Douglas, some really good perspective on this one as well, too. So that's always good to hear, too. We love to hear from the wrestlers. I know you all like to as well. So just really good stuff overall. Yeah. So, that's all we got.
Okay. What do you got for us next week?
What do I? We're actually doing 2 matches next week, if you can believe it. One is going to take up about 28 minutes of our time.
I was wondering why you said 2 matches, but now that's
right. And then so it's going to be a brief pause for a certain event that Vince McMahon will announce. Versus a little different than how they do it nowadays, but we're going to just watch the end of New Year's Revolution 2006 from the start of the Elimination Chamber all the way till when the credits roll. So, and we're going to get into that giant match with all kinds of people. So it should be a good one.
I'm excited, man. All right. We appreciate everyone listening. We'll see you next week on an all new episode of The Path.